Zoom. Recording is in progress. Please don't swear. I might swear, but the
audience shouldn't.
Oh, definitely. So, welcome everybody. This is Exponential Leadership, and I'll just share my screen so we can all see it. So this is actually a really exciting model for us. We've tried to combine all of the learning over the last decade or so into one new framework. It's really uncertain times at the moment. Change is happening faster than it ever has. There's so much focus on the change that technology has brought, but there have been huge changes in terms of social attitudes, in terms of kind of geopolitical connections, and so everything is hitting us all in one go. And so what I've started to develop is this framework of exponential leadership to support leaders in small businesses or large businesses really get their head around change and how they can excite their teams. So this is being simulcast on Twitter, on Clubhouse, and is being recorded on Zoom to be uploaded to YouTube. So whichever way you found us, you're very welcome. And let's go through the slides. So today we're going to be covering a case study in relation to a healthcare provider and the significant changes that we undergone in a very short space of time. We went from a brand new organisation to influencing national policy and international policy within a couple of years. It was absolutely phenomenal. We're going to be sharing some of the secret sauce that was behind those changes, but also because it shouldn't be rocket science, because there are some very practical things you can do, some of the practical innovations, what happened behind the scenes that perhaps wasn't shared. We're also going to be covering different key points of leverage. So these key points of leverage are what you can do in terms of strategy in order to get this momentum going. And what you can do as an individual leader in terms of developing your leadership style and bringing your team along. So welcome to everybody here in the Zoom room, on Clubhouse and on Twitter to our simulcast around exponential leadership. So I absolutely adore this phrase, and it's if I could get it tattooed somewhere, I probably would, but that's another story. The best way to predict the future is to create it. That, believe it or not, came from Abraham Lincoln as a speaker, and it feels so true for today. And I think that so many leaders, so many people are very frightened of the future. They're not sure what's to come, and that fear builds up that sense of uncertainty. In the Clubhouse room sales piracy last week, we were talking about uncertainty, and often uncertainty isn't necessarily about the environmental factors. It's as much about the stress and the assumptions that you layer on in your head. So if you can step back to think carefully about the future, about what possibilities are out there, you can influence it and you can help to create and shape where you go. Okay. A little bit about me. So I've got 2 decades of leadership and management experience. I actually started my career as an intelligence analyst in the police in the 90s in Kent Police. They were heavily influenced by the use of intelligence and data. And so we would map so many different factors and then plan interventions based on that. So whether it was a raid or whether we were keeping an eye on a particular target, but they'd built a system around using data well and acting on data. So I've brought a lot of that knowledge in. Within Devon, I was the founder of Hipster, Health Innovation Plymouth Science Technology Engineering Research. That's what happens when you crowdsource the title of a group, which is hilarious. But I ran a GP practice, a very large GP practice, and I found that there were lots of health tech creators who just weren't getting into the NHS, who just weren't having the right conversations and perhaps didn't have a very good understanding of what was going on in that healthcare market. And so what we wanted to do across Devon and Cornwall is open up that space to help people really kind of make connections, understand the lingo, understand the pressures, do whatever they could to succeed. I've become an international speaker on technology and innovation in healthcare, and I've transformed primary care at scale. One of the things that amused me is I was headhunted to run a GP practice that had merged 3 practices into one, and I'd never worked within an NHS environment until 2014, but I'd gone along and they'd asked me to build out their strategy. And then within 6 months, I was called up on stage at the Royal College of GPs in London to describe how you should run a GP practice at scale. It's such a brand new area, and you kind of look out and go, don't look at my CV, don't look at my CV. But actually, I think the passion that I have and the different insights that I've got into the market have really helped change how you view running primary care at scale. And in 2020, the pandemic kicked my butt, and I'd been really passionate about growth and change in that healthcare provider space, but I really wanted to help as many entrepreneurs and leaders as possible to replicate this. I am hugely passionate about where the world is going right now and about the potential for different businesses, different enterprises to grow. And so I took the jump and set up the business, and now I coach leaders. I give regular talks like these about innovation, about what leadership is, and just help people to grow. My vision is to create 10,000 leaders who are able to develop their businesses, because I really truly believe that if you can invest time and energy into leaders to grow their businesses, then you grow communities. That money goes back into the system. So that's my passionate why. Before we go into the case study, I just want to refresh and say welcome to everybody on Clubhouse, Twitter, and on Zoom and CogX to our room. We're covering exponential leadership, and today I'm covering the case study of the practice when they merged, what bits of strategy we put in place, what bits of structure we put in place in order to build up momentum. So in 2014, the new organisation was formed. It was a merger of 3 practices who were performing well in their own right into one new organisation. And we really started to experiment and change. At that time, we were supporting 32,000 patients, so a small town and a suburban area. And we were big enough to have impact, but small enough to fail. That was kind of our motto in a way. And so we were able to experiment with the service design, the structure of the business, in many different areas, and quickly gained momentum. In stage 2, we saw some early wins, and what that did, for example, with the Royal College of GPs, was to reinforce that we knew what we were doing. We were trusted as innovators and we could make change happen, and it really helped to boost our own confidence, the confidence of the teams who'd put trust in us to make that change happen, but also the confidence of other partners in the local area. So I was in a very privileged position where lots of people said, oh, I hear you like experimenting, will you do this with us? And so I had the joy of saying yes to lots of people all in one go, and then working out how we actually make it happen. And then in the 3rd stage, kind of by 2017, we really significantly shifted the service offering. We'd boosted income by 20% as well. And we'd attracted 2 other partners to the table. We turned away several partners. So we grew to 42,000 patients across 7 sites at that time. We could have been an extra 30,000 more, but we really wanted to focus in on doing things well. We completely changed our model of working, and so using things like the Blue Ocean strategy, worked out collaboration and what that meant, different ways of working with community pharmacy, for example, at a time when there was so much competitive behaviour. It was just not funny. There was so much fear and anger within the system, but we made a conscious choice to say, nope, we're going to work together and get this going. So that's a brief vignette of the practice that I'm talking about. And one of the key elements of success, and if you're on Twitter or Clubhouse, you won't be able to see the screen, it's the innovation curve, innovation diffusion curve, that's on display, and a comment that it ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it, as a throwback to Bananarama. But that's so true in terms of the diffusion of innovation. There are so many different factors at different points. We have innovators and early adopters who could really see what we were trying to do in terms of disruption. They were excitable, they were open to taking risks, they were like us, ready to say yes and just give something a chance to fly. You'd then see an early majority right the way through to a late majority and laggards. And in the local area, kind of a lot of the changes that we were making were disruptive, and some of our peers would openly challenge what we were doing and why we were doing it. And a very small minority would throw rocks at us because essentially with the innovations that we were putting in place, we were threatening the status quo. We were threatening the service models that had been in place for decades and saying, no, we can do more. We want to do more to support the community. But for other providers, that was a big problem. Now, the reason why I've included the diffusion curve here, is really around healthcare and education markets. And it's a very good way of helping you to understand who you're dealing with. What personality, what mindset are you dealing with, either within your teams, within your peers, perhaps even, well, in the practice, there were 23 owners, 23 directors, including me, and I think we were representing every element of the innovation diffusion curve. So at a board, you can have different attitudes to innovation. Within a business, we had 200 members of the team. They were certainly in different elements. Different team members were, different professions were. Our patients, our 42,000 patients from cradle to grave, were definitely at different elements of the diffusion curve. But it's such an important change management tool and selling tool, I guess, in terms of business development, to understand what it is your audience needs to see in order to trust that you're not going to damage something. You have that at heart. You want to make positive change happen. So going on to the next slide, how did we innovate? There you go. So one of the first areas was around workforce. Now, I'd gone from a local authority, a local government background, and moved into healthcare. And if you don't know the UK local government scene, this was a business, this is a corporate business that had been under threat from revenue. So we were looking at a 40% revenue cut. That's 40% revenue cuts. We were also run, we kind of had the strategic leads, but also the politicians had the final say. And in Plymouth, the political bias switches between blue and red every few years. So what would happen within the local authority that I worked in is that every few years you would have a restructure and a change. And so get used to working on that shifting sands. But when I moved into the practice arena, there were teams that had been very static for 20 years. Some of the medical secretaries had bits added onto their job, but not necessarily taken off. They'd still had the pay rise. They'd been very, very settled. So this outsider came in from a very different culture to look at how we could innovate quite quickly. And it was hugely scary for some people. I sometimes wish that I could hear the gossip, but sometimes don't. But what did we do? We had a blank sheet, and in that first year, because we'd gone into a merger environment, we had the opportunity to completely set the new structure in place. So in that first year, I carried out 4 restructures of teams, which is quite significant in terms of threat and opportunity for different people. But when we restructured the teams, we had a look at the team size, we had a look at the team descriptions, moved people together into functional teams that had been working on different sites. We escalated, we boosted the authority of the roles in terms of their expectations as well. We recognised how valuable and important every member of the team was. That was the opportunity really within the restructures. We built in accountability as well, and so what we'd seen in the previous structures is that the practice manager had ultimately been the one who made all the decisions, who made the hiring and firing decisions, and led appraisals, whereas team leads in the front of house perhaps didn't have that opportunity. And so we looked at accountability being spread throughout the organisation. So I guess it's a Spider-Man reference. People have power to make change happen, but they were also responsible to make sure those changes happened. We looked at interdisciplinary teams as well, and so really very much about breaking down the different silos between professions. In some parts of the NHS, in some practices, the non-medical staff will call doctors doctor, so Dr. Smith, Dr. Jones, and it creates a barrier. So we really focused on the interdisciplinary to say, right, let's just, if you're not in front of a patient, don't call the doctor, call them Sam, call them Mary. Just, they are human beings. We are part of a team and we are hugely valuable. So by changing the structure, by changing the team structure, by changing the terms and conditions and setting expectations, we were able to not undermine, we shifted what the culture of the teams would look like. We shifted that day to day from a structural perspective. When we look at other oh, Aslam, sorry to hear you coughing away there. When we looked at other areas, we looked at culture. So as you might imagine, all of those workforce changes fed their way through into cultural change. So how, sorry, I'm just looking at the slides. Yeah, how did we innovate in terms of culture? We humanized the teams. We, as I say, kind of introduced first names for each other. We helped people feel valued. And that came through both in terms of the expectations we set up in the structures and the teams, but it also came through in the language that we used. We created things like Star of the Month to recognize really good practice, but it also showed people that they were seen. And I think so many people come to work and just put their head down and get on, and particularly those in vocational roles, they don't always appreciate how special they are and the impact that they have. And so just the smallest token of gratitude that says, I've seen what you do, you're just amazing, you make an impact, you really thought about that interaction with the person, it definitely helped our culture to bed in and to grow. We were unashamed about ambition. The language, we'll come on to that a little bit later, but we wanted to shift our identity from being the smaller practices to being one of the largest providers. And it was never about takeover. It was never about size or power or dominance. It was about the ambition of stepping into that role, stepping into a new identity and truly being a larger organization. So for many of the businesses, like intending deliberately to be a business that can handle change, setting that as a declaration, can open up, can speed up change within your organization, just in terms of the intention. We also, within the culture, found a way to encourage failure. And this is a saying that goes around so many times, well, parable, I guess, in terms of how you cannot innovate without failing. If we draw parallels, I'm a huge fan of motorsport, and I'm a huge fan of motorsport on two wheels. And you see some of the absolute best riders on the planet within MotoGP or within World Superbikes. And you see the very best crash time and time and time again. And you think, well, that was all of that money, all of that time that the engineers have thrown into preparing the bike, the impact on the person's body. But that's one of the things that I admire the most about motorbike races, is that they are willing to push their bodies and push the machines and push the teams to the absolute limits. And that's why they fail. But they are pushing and pushing and pushing. And it's so true within a corporate environment or within a business environment that you cannot realize how far you can push without being willing to fail. And it seems ironic putting this up at the moment here in the UK with the NHS and responses to the pandemic. It seems that kind of doctors get accused and blamed for a million things. Politicians get blamed for a million things. And when things go wrong, it ends up in the press. Well, actually, that doesn't help us all to move on. It doesn't help us to move forward. We need to take a different approach to failure. So we would do things like review together. We would encourage people to make mistakes, not deliberately make mistakes, but I'd encourage people to make change happen. And unless they burnt down the practice, killed people, or made us bankrupt, they had my permission. And that's some really broad boundaries in order to make change happen. So we had the change in the structure of the organization, and that's what HR teams can do really well. That's what policies can do really well. But you also need to have the culture where you're having the conversations, you're celebrating failure, you're curious about it, you're supporting when things go wrong. So the culture sits alongside that, certainly. I'm going to add in another dynamic here in terms of the service model, because we made some significant changes to the service model. We looked at efficiencies, of course. But what's really important to say is that we never looked to make people redundant. We never looked to make cuts in our spending or in our team. That's probably the better way to say it. And the reason why I say that is that we looked around and there was so much pressure. People felt like they weren't getting the job done, but they felt aggrieved that they were not finishing off their work and having to come into another huge list of things to do. And often when businesses and when leaders are introducing technology, it can be seen as threatening. It does achieve efficiency, it makes better use of the resources that we've got. But for many people who are at the other end of that change, they see it as an opportunity for cost saving or an opportunity to cut jobs. And we were really clear from the start that we wanted to make people's lives, working lives, better. We wanted to give them that sense of achievement. We wanted to take away the stress and we wanted them to thrive. And so hopefully you can pick up that those small nuances in language meant that we were able to encourage everybody to step up to the change, because it was for their benefit as well as for the benefit of patients. We had several rapid reiterations. So as I say, we were very experimental. We were willing to just try stuff and break stuff and then either fix stuff or ditch stuff. We would try pilots that lasted for 3 months, and if they weren't working in that time, we'd lose them. We became known for embracing that change, for testing things out, being a test bed, because we would be able to critically evaluate what worked and what didn't work, and then move on, without attachment. And I think often when you're trying to make transformation happen, you invest so much in that change that you don't accept failure. And that's just crazy. Failure will come. But what you need to do is plan, do, study, act, plan, do, study, act, and keep going through that cycle, because there will be nuance. Collaboration was definitely another area that we amended the service model. And here, this is where I'd like to bring through the Blue Ocean example and what we did with flu jabs. So if you don't know, behind the scenes here in the UK, GP practices get paid at the time roughly £9 per flu jab that they gave to patients. And practically, that would work if you were kind of almost running it on an industrial scale. But if you had to have an appointment where a patient turned up for 15 minutes and that was all that they had, it was not cost effective. But flu jabs are a really important way for practices to supplement their income. And in 2016 or so, community pharmacies were given the contract as well to do flu jabs for the same cost. And so up and down the country, community pharmacy and GP practices were fighting against each other to try to attract more customers, to try to attract people to have their flu jabs. And in some areas that had shifted to fully antagonistic and competitive behaviours. So, for example, I've heard stories of community pharmacy sneaking a poster into the waiting room and encouraging patients not to wait in the queue in the front desk and come downstairs and have their jab. I'd heard stories about practice managers telling patients that the vaccine that was being given in the community pharmacy could kill them or was poisonous, which seems really daft behaviour, but came from a sense of fear and came from a sense of scarcity. We took a different approach. We decided that actually, if we collaborated together between community pharmacy and GP practices, if we showed the community at large that we were working together and we each had the interests of keeping patients safe at heart, that we could demonstrate that we were in this together and encourage more patients to have their flu jabs. If you're interested in this, I'd encourage you to have a look at the book Blue Ocean Strategy. It looks at this in much more detail. But in that first year, we actually saw a 5% increase in the uptake for flu jabs, which was really good progress. So neither side lost. In fact, we were both able to coexist. The year after, we took that a little bit further and co-designed our social media strategies, our communication strategies, and we chose to approach patients who were working age adults with respiratory conditions. And we'd said, right, we're only reaching 39% of the eligible cohort here. And this is an at-risk group who are at risk of being hospitalised if they have a bad reaction to flu. So let's focus in on those and give them their flu jabs. And we coordinated that behaviour. And in a year, we saw a 16% increase in the take-up. So already significant changes in the local community based on us showing greater leadership and us showing that collaboration. Stakeholder engagement was another area that we innovated on, and we worked very closely with our patient groups. We encouraged honesty among our staff with our patients, and we opened up about the changes that we were going through. We opened up about our failures, and we asked for really good feedback. We asked the patient groups to come on board and to help us make the changes. And within a couple of years, our patient group chair approached me and said, you know what, I really want to help you help our town feel healthier? What can we do? Why don't we run a joint event together? Why don't we run a community event? And this is a significant step forward in terms of relationships, but also ownership. So encouraging stakeholders to be involved in that dialogue, to see what goes on behind the scenes. So sharing some confidential or at least commercially sensitive information so that they felt included and trusted meant that they felt on board, and we were able to make the changes to our business that would fit what they wanted, because they trusted us enough to tell us what was wrong, sometimes too much. So those elements all work well together, both in terms of the workforce and the culture, the service changes that you put in place, and then how you work with your communities, how you work with your customers. And I'm going to share with you, 3 key points here about strategy and what helped us to make the shift. The first is definitely around vision. If you can embody exponential thinking, if you can step into embracing disruptive behaviors, if you can attach to a really strong purpose and make it clear that that's what drives your business, you can really tap into the hearts and minds of your teams and other people. You'll find that other disruptors, other stakeholders are on board because you've often got the same mission at heart. The next area is around the capabilities, and so you need to design this into your leaders and into job descriptions. So we brought in a blend of optimism and realism, being able to work at a fast pace, deliberately being expansive and looking at new opportunities, new contracts, new grants, new partners. And we recruited based on innovation and change. By building that into the capabilities, we were able to shift the practice forward by roughly 4 years. The kinds of changes we were talking about were radical in terms of the market that we were working in. It meant that we were able to get hold of the best talent. It meant that people came to us with ideas in order to test, and all of that fed into us accelerating as a business altogether. And then the other strategic element is around a cultural evolution. So how we were able to embrace that new identity, how we valued innovation, how we communicated internally and externally, really did help us to move forward the business. Let's just move on then to the 3 secrets to leading innovation, which are around mindset, networks, and storytelling. So mindset is something that every leader needs to embrace, that to have the curiosity to embrace failure, to create a psychologically safe place for their teams, that they're able to come back with criticism or be honest about something that's gone wrong. Ask questions if they don't understand. That's not always built in. Networks. So being here at CogX and linking in with other people, signing up to different newsletters, following social media, asking questions and encouraging your teams to do the same really does open up their eyes both to new ideas, but also helps them to see how special the work that they do. And then storytelling, so having that clear vision, being able to sell that vision is so important in terms of leading exponential change. So hopefully you found that useful. Exponential leadership is not beyond the grasp. There aren't magic ingredients. It is fast. It can be designed in. I guess in the key bits are around uncertainty, but you can design in small changes to how you talk, what you reward, what the structure is, but it does happen. And As a business here at Neon Juno, this is a theme that we work with leaders on, so those we coach and mentor, but we also provide leadership training that can help your teams to embrace change and to make change happen well. It's something I'm hugely passionate about, as I say, because if we can help businesses to thrive, we can help communities to thrive. And so if you're curious and want to carry on the conversation, please do get in touch, either via LinkedIn, so with me directly, Claire Oatway, at Claire Oatway, or at Neon Juno, NEONJUNO, or via our website, neon-juno.com. That's all we've got for today, and we look forward to carrying on the conversation. Enjoy the rest of the conference and take care.